Sabbath. Good morning to you all, viewers and listeners. As we meet again on this Sabbath, on the 16th of October, we are going to be studying about the present truth, and our topic is on a theocratic system. We are used to democratic systems. In all the world, governments are ruling on democratic systems. But God does not have democracy. God has theocratic system. This is what we want to know as we say we are in the judgment of the living, where a theocratic system is introduced by God. But let's define this. Some may say, what is theocracy? And what is democracy? So let us hear from the Google. Go to Google. You find what is theocracy. Let's start with democracy. What is democracy? Let's read from Google Dictionary. What democracy is there. Let's hear democracy. What is it?
A system of government by the whole population or all the eligible members of the state, typically through elected representatives.
Right. Yeah.
A state governed under a system of democracy. Control of an organization or group by the majority of its members.
Right. So when they say this is democratic government, they mean members have to elect, and they believe a majority is the rule. Do you understand? When there is any point, they vote for a point, and majority becomes the point. And when the majority says yes, then the point is upheld. When the majority says no, the point is thrown away. That's what is called democratic system. But God has what is called theocratic system. Let's hear from Google again what theocracy is. What is a theocratic system? Let's hear from it. Right?
A system of government in which priests rule in the name of God or a god.
Right? Yeah.
The Commonwealth of Israel from the time of Moses until the election of Saul as king.
Right. So, God was ruling from the time of Moses to the election of Saul. That time, he was ruling through a theocratic system. And what does it mean? It does not believe in majority. It believes that God has said to a prophet, and what he has said to a prophet is supreme. There is no one saying, but I say no, God does not rule like that. From the time of Moses to the election of Saul. So when you understand now, when they were crying for Saul, to elect a leader after Samuel, and saying Samuel is now old, so we need to elect a leader, like other nations. You see, they were crying for a democratic system. To come off from a theocratic system to a democratic. And this is why God said to them, okay, he was not pleased when they all wanted to go to that system. And he said, they are not refusing you, Samuel. They are refusing him. But he allowed them to elect a democratic system, which Saul, the ruler, was ruling through democracy. So, on the judgment of the living, what then do you think God is going to bring? A system of what? When he elects, when he has instruments who are ruling, and as it says in Malachi chapter 4, verse 4 to 5, he is going to raise Elijah. Which system do you think Elijah will come with? Most people will say Elijah should come with a democratic system, or Elijah should come in. But we now want to study how a theocratic system comes about when God says he's going to elect a prophet in the last days. He is now introducing a theocratic system back to his people, like he did from Moses to the time before Saul was elected. Do you understand? So if in our Google says it is a system between Moses and Saul, did you see it? Clear. That's what it's called, the Theocratic system, where God's word was the one which is supreme. So it was God who was ruling his people through a system called theocracy. Do you understand? So now we are going to study a judgment of the living together with a theocratic system being introduced by God. When he comes to establish his kingdom, he is not coming to establish democracy anymore. He is introducing theocracy. But does it start then in the time when he established the kingdom? That's my question. Does it start in the time of the loud cry? Because when he established the kingdom, it will be the time of the loud crying to all nations. But here we have a loud cry, which starts when judgment begins in the house of God. That is a loud cry. Now let's hear this theocratic system. Now let's hear them from the verses that I chose in the quotation that I chose. I think they will highlight to us to see where we start from. Understand? Right. Let's hear from Genesis chapter 49, verse 10.
The scepter shall not depart from Judah,
Right.
nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come,
Right.
and unto him shall the gathering of the people be.
Right. In the time of the loud cry, that's what we call the time of the gathering of the people, or the time of the harvest. There will be a scepter. It will be still there from the scepter, which was a lawgiver in Judah. It won't depart from Judah. And the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him, Shiloh, shall the gathering of the people be. Who is Shiloh? It's Christ. So the gathering of people will be there where the scepter is. So when you hear about the scepter or a lawgiver, we are hearing God talking to us about a prophet who is going to conduct his laws in the time of the gathering. Now, let's read again in Isaiah chapter 32, verse 1 and 2.
Behold,
Behold,
a king shall reign in righteousness,
right,
and princes shall rule in judgment.
right,
And a man shall be as an hiding place from the wind, and a covert from the tempest,
right,
as rivers of water in a dry place, as the shadow of a great rock in a weary land.
What is God saying? There is a time in the earth where he has what he calls a king. There will be a king who shall reign in righteousness. In righteousness, he is a lawgiver. And the princes shall rule in judgment. So the man or the woman could be any gender, because to God no gender is supreme to the other. If you know from the beginning, when both Eve and Adam were created, they were all called Adam. So to him, these questions of gender that you are wasting time with, they don't, tally with God. But he says there will be somebody ruling in righteousness. This is the verse which says, a king shall reign in righteousness, and princes shall rule in judgment. And a man shall be as an hiding place from the wind. What do you get from there? So somewhere hidden there, we should know there is a king who God upholds in the last days, and who he says is a prophet or Elijah, or to him that man or that woman is a king, which he puts where he says the scepter shall not depart. So where does this person go? Where the scepter is. The way he was ruling when it was Moses, between Moses and the appointment of Saul, there is a scepter there, who he called a man shall rule in righteousness. A lawgiver shall rule in righteousness. But that person is hidden to view for anybody to see. for anybody to see that there is a king ruling in righteousness who God works through like he did in the time between Moses and before the appointment of Saul. Do you understand? Now here it says, and a man shall be as an hiding place from the wind, and a covert from the tempest, as rivers of water in a dry place, as the shadow of a great rock in a weary land. So we have all the land going in peacefully like that, or maybe whatever it is, could be peaceful, could be any wars, anything. But we know for sure as people who are in the harvest time that God has a king who is reigning in righteousness. This is what we are being told. Let's go to another verse again, Isaiah chapter 55. Verse 4 to 6. That one is a bit more elaborate and more clearer. Let's hear. Mm-hmm.
For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace.
Right. So when we went to Isaiah chapter 55 verse 4, is that verse 4?
55
verse 4. Right? Isaiah 55 verse 4.
Behold, I have given him for a witness to the people.
Right. So now, there in the first verse he was reading was pertaining to Christ. But here we see somebody who is not Christ in that verse again, right? Let's hear.
Behold, I have given him for a witness to the people.
Right. There is somebody then God gives us for a witness to the people, right?
A leader and commander to the people.
He sets a commander and a leader to the people, right? And
verse 5.
Verse 5.
Behold, thou shalt call a nation that thou knowest not.
Right.
And
so what will this leader do? Will call a nation that the leader doesn't know. So it means when you see the 144,000 coming from different places, the leader does not even know these people. But what does God call all these people? A nation. So when the Elijah is working of this time, the people who respond, God makes sure the people of different nations respond. But what is this leader building up? He's building a nation. The 144,000 is a nation of the 12 tribes. Did you hear? But they are called from different places, even when the leader doesn't even know where these people are coming from. But God knows he is collecting the 144,000 from all these nations and making a big nation under Elijah of the time. Do you understand? Now, read on, let's hear. Have you gone up to verse 6?
Not yet.
Right.
Behold.
We'll start from 4, verse 4.
Verse 4. Behold, I have given him for a witness to the people.
So he has given someone for a witness to the people, so that he will ask, did you see this person? Did you see this person? So it's for a witness to the people. Say, yes, we heard about this person. We heard about this person, right? And
behold, I have given him for a witness to the people,
right?
A leader and commander to the people.
So God has raised a leader and commander to the people, right?
Behold, thou shalt call a nation that thou knowest not.
So the leader will call for a nation that the leader does not know. Why? Because the leader will be given a message of the statutes. And whoever will respond to the message of the statutes, which the leader called Elijah at that last time, those responding are responding as a nation, which Elijah is building up. Do you see what is happening in the judgment of the living? Now read on, let's hear.
And nations that knew not thee shall run unto thee, because the Lord thy God, and for the Holy One of Israel, for he hath glorified thee.
Right. So what God does first, glorifies the leader. And nations that have never known that leader will run up to the leader. So this is how the the judgment of the living, the purpose of the judgment of the living is when the 144,000 are gathered, they become a nation under that leader. Simple like that. Now, let's read on. Have you seen verse 6?
No, not yet.
Right, let's go.
Seek ye the Lord
Seek ye the
while
Lord,
he may be found.
while he may be found.
Call ye upon him
Right.
while he is near.
Right, that whole chapter is so interesting. But I will jump onto verse 13. Go to verse 13. Mhm.
Instead of thorn
Right.
shall come.
We had seen in Isaiah chapter
Oh, yeah.
5 there that when God was crying for his vineyard, and instead when he went to inspect the vineyard, what happened? He found wild grapes, thorns,
Briars.
and briars. Now instead, when he has raised a leader who is glorified and who is a lawgiver, who is going to be raising nation from people who don't know the leader, but they are raised by a message. Instead, what happens? 13, the thorns and briars, what happened? Right?
Instead of the thorn
Yeah.
shall come up the fig tree.
Right. Instead, when God was saying this vine has brought thorns and briars, when he wanted to make sure they bring up a people who are sealed by the gospel of Elijah. But when Elijah is raised to that vineyard which has thorns and briars, instead of the thorns and briars, what is God coming up with?
Fig tree.
Fig trees. Now God is happy. At least the vine has produced 144,000, which he calls figs. These are figs. Instead of thorns and briars, which were there when he came to inspect in 1844, he inspected and he wanted to cut the tree to say this tree has not produced fruits. It's got thorns and briars. So instead, Christ said, let's further give me more time so I can cultivate this vineyard. And instead, God raised Elijah, glorified Elijah, to bring a message of the statutes to the people. But what is the end result? Instead of where there was thorns and briars, we find fig tree, enough fruits for God to be happy. This is 144,000 produced from the church. Now let's hear more.
Instead of the thorn shall come up the fig tree.
Right?
And instead of the briar
Right.
shall come up the myrtle tree.
Right.
And-
So God has got fruit that he was looking for. But who did that? It's Elijah. It's not any other talent. It is the talent of the prophet. The prophet that he raised in the last days is the one who raised those thorns and briars to become fig and myrtle tree. Did you hear that? Now read on, let's hear.
And it shall be to the Lord for a name,
Right?
for an everlasting sign that shall not be cut off.
Right. So instead of cutting off the vine, the whole vine, he has preserved the 144,000 not to be cut off. Did you see that? Read on, let's hear. That's the end. So the end of it, when he has raised a lawgiver or a ruler, what he calls a king, what he calls a prophet, Elijah, he raises that and glorifies that leader who comes to make sure I cultivate the vineyard which has been abandoned by God because he was angry. And instead, the people are sealed. The thorns and briars are sealed. The 144,000 is sealed. And so this is the prophecy of Isaiah chapter 55. But let's go back where we were reading, where we were told the scepter. Let's go to one more verse, which I want. Isaiah 9. Is it the one that you have read before? You have read it. Go to Isaiah 40 verse 10, right?
40 verse 10. Behold, the Lord God will come with strong hand,
Right.
and
So-
his arm.
So how does God operate then with this king, where the scepter shall not be abandoned? Instead, there is a king. The Lord now, he says, will come. Read the verse.
Behold, the Lord God will come with strong hand,
Right.
and
so,
his arm.
So when you see my arm, it's not the whole of me. And when the Bible says arm of the Lord, means an instrument of God or a prophet of God. So here God is saying, how does he come then to the vine which had not produced enough food? How does Elijah work? So he described the work of Elijah as God comes with a strong arm. What is it? So the messenger of the hour, of the last minute, should be a strong arm from God. You see? God will come with strong hand. Now, and what?
And his arm shall rule for
So
him.
you see, the arm has a tendency to rule. So it's a person, isn't it?
Yeah.
We all agree that the arm is not God coming, but God sends a prophet who shall what? Who shall rule
For him.
like he said, the scepter shall not depart from Judah until Shiloh comes. So how does then this scepter means is a ruler. How does the ruler, in a way we see a prophet, but God says he's a ruler. So how does this ruler rule? It says, behold, the Lord God will come with strong hand, and his arm shall rule for him. So there's somebody doing the work for God in the last time, who is called God's arm. Right? And what? Behold.
Behold, the Lord God will come with strong hand, and his arm shall rule for him.
Right?
Behold, his reward is with him.
And he comes with a reward. Yeah? So it says you will then give them what reward? What is this reward? What is the reward given to this king? When you're a king, what reward do you want? You want a kingdom. That's the reward.
Oh, yeah.
So a king cannot rule without a kingdom. So God brings a reward for the king, because the king has been ruling, but there is no visible kingdom. So God brings a reward of a kingdom. Did you see that? Now let's hear.
And his work before him.
So he has a work. What work? The gathering of the people will be conducted by the arm of God. The arm of God. So when we were saying that day, when Christ established the kingdom, it will be the branch be brought unto David. So the king will be like David. And the branch is Christ brought unto David. So what is it? This is the kingdom, how the kingdom will be managed, will be ruled. It will be God, the branch, Christ the branch, and the arm of God, which is the prophet who was working already and is being given a reward of a kingdom to rule properly. Did you hear that? This is what we are saying. We want to read what the judgment of the living, how is it going to end up? How is it ruling right now? And how does it end up? Because it's not like God will raise a prophet and that prophet will just prepare for his coming, and when he comes, like it was with John the Baptist, when Christ came, John the Baptist said, you increase, I decrease. But with this last prophet, it's not the same as John the Baptist. When the prophet is working, the last reward the prophet will get is the kingdom to continue ruling, like he said in Matthew chapter 24, verse 48. It says, who then is this faithful servant who the Lord has brought as the ruler? Go to that verse in the Bible, in Matthew chapter 24, verse 40. Who then is this servant? Right? I want that sentence from verse 48. Who then? Yeah. Who then? I think next to 48, right? You can't get it.
Verse 45.
45, yeah.
Who then is a faithful and wise servant?
Who then is this faithful and wise servant?
Whom his Lord hath made ruler over his household.
Do you see now how you understand that verse? The Lord made the faithful servant ruler. But why? Read and finish.
Whom his Lord hath made ruler over his household,
right?
To give them meat in due season.
So what the servant was doing was giving the world meat in due season. So God, because of that, makes him ruler. How? By giving a reward. A reward of what? Of the kingdom. So what what will God do to the servant? Read on, let's hear.
Blessed is that servant
Blessed is that servant.
whom his Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing.
Right?
Verily I say unto you, that he shall make him ruler over all his goods.
You see, the end results of the prophet Elijah is to be made now ruler of all the how. So that's why I ask, when did Elijah start ruling? When he or she was giving meat in due season. When did the meat in due season start? When the doctrine of the latter end started. Which one is it? The sealing. As long as you understand that we are in the sealing period, we are in the doctrine of the latter end. It reigns as latter end, and finally we get the miracle of latter end on the day of Pentecost when Christ stands with the 144,000 on the Mount Sinai. Did you understand? So, but what has been happening all along before Christ came? There was a ruler, a scepter which did not depart from Judah, which has been ruling, hiding. Yeah, that's what we got from Isaiah 55. It was hiding, and the tempest is there. The ruler, God is protecting the ruler, and finally, in the kingdom, you see that the ruler now is being given. God will make him ruler of all the things because he was declaring meat in due season. You understand now? You know how to connect these, bind up these prophecies so that they make sense to you, right? Let's read again from another. Today we are more on the Bible. Because people say, oh, you are reading this, your own spiritual prophets books, we have no proof. We take your own Bible. Take your own Bible. That's where we are taking all this. Now, go to now Isaiah 11, verse 1 to 5. We are in the judgment of the living. What happens?
And there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse.
Right?
Prophecies. Yeah? Prophecies,
Right.
Isaiah. In figurative depiction.
Right, so we are commenting from T8, right, tract 8, page 44, right? Prophecy.
And there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse.
Right?
Prophecies, Isaiah in figurative depiction of this glory triumph of God's purpose.
Right.
And a branch shall grow out of his roots, and the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him.
Right.
The Spirit of wisdom and understanding.
So let's see then what this verse means. Because we have been told that prophesied Isaiah depicting this figurative Isaiah in figurative depiction of this glorious triumph of God's purpose. So this is God's purpose, to raise Elijah. But now we are seeing from Isaiah, same scenario, talking about the same thing, same idea, that and there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. This is the verse of Isaiah.
Yeah.
So there is a branch. So we have explained this before. We have said, when you take you want to grow a tree, you take a stick and plant it in the soil. What starts first? The roots. And next, the stem. So this stem, we have been told, the stem is the stem of Jesse. So we see in another explanation from Sister White that the root and the stem, William Miller is the root, and the stem is Sister White. That's where the Sabbath keeping it came from. It's all called stem. And then what comes from the stem? A rod. There shall come forth a rod. So you see a rod growing up. And next, after the rod, what do you expect? A branch. This is how a tree grows. And this is what is in Isaiah. But now we are being told there is a ruler coming from the stem of Jesse. So we should know that the ruler has gone through the phases of reading information from William Miller, reading from the Sabbath Keeping Church, Sister White, reading from the rod, reading then from the branches. So it's got all the 5 messages. So the ruler should have all these 5 messages, and then God appoints that ruler to rule the whole nation with information from the 5 messages, the 5 angels' messages. That's where the ruler should come. This is the root of Jesse. Did you hear that? Now let's hear from the next verse there. Yeah. In the end, the branch shall grow out of. So we have seen why we are mentioning them in this context, right?
And the branch shall grow out of his roots.
Right.
And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him.
So what will rest upon this ruler? The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him. What spirit? Because he's a prophet. A prophet should be raised by the Spirit of the Lord. Did you hear that? And what else is in that spirit? Let's hear.
The spirit of wisdom.
The prophet should have the spirit of wisdom.
And understanding.
And also understanding of these 5 angels' messages, right?
The spirit of counsel and might.
And the prophet should have the spirit of counsel. And whatever, the spirit of might.
The spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord.
The prophet should have the spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. This is what is being conducted in the judgment of the living. When we have a ruler, should have all those properties. Where this ruler should have what? The spirit of the Lord, fear of the Lord. So you see, it's not God himself who is in this as a branch. It's his arm. It's somebody who is working it for God, who he calls his arm, should have all these properties. 1, the spirit of the Lord, right? Of fear of the Lord, which will rest upon him or her, right? And the spirit of wisdom should be there. And the spirit of understanding. What is it? Understanding what? The prophecies. Putting them to the people. The spirit of the Lord should be on that Elijah. And also the spirit of wisdom and understanding and the spirit of counsel. She'll know how to counsel. That's the spirit resting upon Elijah the last, right? And also the counsel and also the spirit of might. Yeah, and the spirit of knowledge and the spirit of fear of the Lord. How do we fear the Lord? For we see in Malachi chapter 3 verse 16, them that fear the Lord, they sat down and counseled together. So what is it that makes you fear the Lord? When we see the reason why God gave this commandment, the statutes, the festivals and everything, the first reason it was to fear the Lord. So the leader should be a feast keeper. That is where you show you fear the Lord. The statutes. What do we get from statutes? We get the spirit to fear the Lord. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 6 and see what do we get from the statutes. Go from verse 17. Let's hear.
17. Ye shall diligently keep the commandments of the Lord.
Right?
And his testimonies.
Right?
And his statutes.
Right.
Which he hath commanded thee.
Right. Verse 24.
24. And the Lord commanded us to do all of these statutes.
Right?
To fear the Lord
The
our God.
statutes, which are the festivals, they give you the spirit to fear the Lord. So if we have time, we are going to elaborate each and every gift that the Spirit gave to the Elijah of the time, and you see what it is. It is what you practice. Yeah. So when you practice these statutes, these festivals, you get the spirit of the fear of the Lord. Do you understand? So this is clean. And go back to the paragraph. It says now, the prophet will get it's the arm of the Lord will get the spirit of counsel and might and spirit of knowledge and the spirit of fear of the Lord. And what if?
And shall make him of quick understanding in the fear of the Lord.
Right. So that the prophet will be given all these blessings and will quickly understand them. God will make the prophet of quick understanding of all these things. So when that prophet has to come to the people, will have all that knowledge, all that wisdom, the talents given from the Spirit from God as a ruler, as a scepter, not departing from Judah. Do you understand? Now let's read on there. Make him quick understanding.
And he shall not judge after the sight of his eyes.
And when the Elijah who has been raised will not judge
Out of the sight of his eyes.
out of the sight of his eyes, because you can see sometimes people are judging. They don't exercise impartiality. They are so partial that if it is so and so, no, this one no. Even if it's wrong, no. You know, that's being partial. But the Spirit of the Lord will rest upon the prophet to be impartial. Did you hear that? And what?
And he shall not judge after the sight of his own eyes,
Right?
neither reprove after the hearing of his ears.
Not even hearing. So the prophet will, whatever you give in the ear, you should produce evidence. So we will not judge from a hearsay. We'll judge from evidences. Evidences, this is what goes with the prophet. Right? And what?
And he shall
Right?
and he shall not judge after the sight of his eyes, neither reprove after the hearing of his ears.
Right?
But with righteousness shall he judge the poor, and reprove with equity for the meek of the earth.
Right?
And he shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked.
So how will he slay the earth? You slay with the sword from the mouth, which is the word. The message coming from the mouth, from BSM TV, what does it do? It is a sword which smites. So anyone, if the message does not benefit you, it kills you. It destroys your name from the book of life. So this is what God has given the Elijah of the time, that this Elijah is going to judge that way. Did you understand? And what?
And righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins.
What is on the girdle of the loins of this king? Righteousness. Right?
And faithfulness,
And
the girdle,
also should be faithful. Right?
the girdle of his reins.
The girdle of his. So we are so blessed in the last time, in the judgment of the living, for God to produce such a person, to come and make sure the 144,000 are sealed from somebody of high quality, which God has raised in the last days. Which is so when you say we have no prophet, no. What about this one? Where does that one go? Yeah, for sure you don't have that person like that. It's true. It's not, but there is a person like this. Our job is to look for this person with those qualities that God has said. Yes, God had promised when Christ came the first time that there will be somebody like this. They were not even worried to look for where Christ is. They were actually denouncing him like Belial, like anything. This is the order of the day. When God has said, there is someone who will rule in his stead, who is a prophet of the last time, when he is sealing, is the message coming to the 144,000. The prophet will be faithful to the message. Will fear God, not men. Will tell the people as it is, not men. Not fearing men, but fearing God. And this is what God is going to reign on earth before the establishment of the kingdom. And the prophet will be there. When the kingdom starts, Christ comes as a branch to sit with David. This is another angle that we have discovered. There is a person like that. Apart from the Isaiah 55 we are reading, Genesis 49 we are reading, but we have seen from another angle, Isaiah chapter 11, Isaiah pronounces they should be in the last days. Now let's go again to another, as you go down with the tract 8. In this illustration, let's hear the explanation.
In this illustration, there are three persons brought to view. Jesse, the father of David.
Right?
The rod, David. And the branch, Christ.
Right. So we have been introduced to three persons on Isaiah chapter 11. Jesse, we know Jesse. Right? And David, we know David was the son of Jesse. And Christ, the branch. Right? This is what the relationship.
The relationship shows that David, the rod, is not Christ, the branch.
Right. So when you're talking about David, so now we are being introduced to another name where we call this last prophet, not even Elijah, the one we were discussing last week, but this week we are discussing the same Elijah as David. Did you understand? So that's why the names David, the name Elijah, the name, all these, they pertain to the last prophet of the hour. Today, with this tract now is showing us this name being David, the name of Elijah now being David. But why David? This is why we want to study these prophets. So we have been introduced to that there's the Jesse and David and the branch. So the branch which is Christ. So read one, relationship shows.
The relationship shows that David, the rod, is not Christ, the branch.
Right.
For the rod sprang from the stem of Jesse,
Right.
and the branch from the rod.
Right. So what came from where Isaiah chapter 11 clearly says, there shall come out of the stem. There shall come a rod. So the rod came from the stem. And what came from the rod? The branch. And the branch comes from the rod. So read one, let's hear there.
A fact which is borne out in the cry of the multitude when Christ entered Jerusalem. They shouted, Hosanna to the
In
Son
Matthew chapter
of David.
21, verse 15.
Hosanna to the Son of David.
That's what they said. They did not say Christ was David.
No.
Christ was the son of David. So that's why it's true that the branch came from the rod, which is David. David then is the rod. So Hosanna to the son of David. So Christ is not called David. Christ is called the son of David in Matthew chapter 21, verse 15. Plainly.
Plainly, therefore, the rod coming from the stem of Jesse is symbolical of David, and the branch coming from the rod is symbolical of the Son of David, Christ.
That one we are clear. We are home and dry. Now let's go to the next paragraph there.
Upon this ensign, branch and
rod. So
rod.
what is the ensign then?
The branch and the rod.
The two. The branch and the rod, or the branch and David. So that's why I'm saying in the kingdom, when Christ comes to rule unto David, like it is in Jeremiah 23 verse 5, it says, I will raise a righteous branch unto David. So what is it that we are expecting in the kingdom? We are expecting these two to be there ruling. But how did David start? Started with the judgment of the living. And when Christ comes, so both of them, Christ, which is the branch, and David, the two of them, they are the ones called ensign. So, but on the seals in early writing, we find three people. We find one, God, who preached the seal God, is Sister White. And we find New Jerusalem, and we find Jesus' new name. These are the two are called ensign. David and the branch, called ensign. Of course, the David of this hour is called the ensign. Is those two seals are called ensign. Now let's hear. The spirit of wisdom. Want to elaborate. The spirit of the Lord shall rest. Right.
Upon this ensign, branch and rod. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest.
Right.
The Spirit of wisdom and understanding.
So when they are ruling is Christ and David, who is now the prophet. What do they have? The Spirit of the Lord shall rest. So what is resting on the prophet Elijah, who is now David? The Spirit of the Lord. Right? And
the spirit of wisdom and understanding.
Also they have the spirit of wisdom.
The spirit of counsel and might.
And the spirit of counsel and might.
The spirit of knowledge and of fear.
Right.
The spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord.
Right.
And shall make him a quick understanding in the fear of the Lord. And he shall not judge after the sight of his eyes, neither reprove after the hearing of his ears. So it's just a repetition of what Isaiah chapter 11 is said. From Isaiah 11 verse 2 to 5. That's where you are reading. So go under the verse and say, so though the ensign. So though the ensign emblematizes the connection of three persons,
Right?
Jesse, the root, David, the rod, and Christ, the branch.
Right?
Yet the power and wisdom of Christ is an underlying and controlling force.
So what is the controlling force of all these prophets?
The power and wisdom of Christ.
The power and wisdom of Christ goes to the prophet. Right?
Wherefore, says Christ, I am the root and of the offspring of David.
So God now is the root.
And the
Christ
offspring.
is the root. Where is that root? We heard from Isaiah chapter 11, there is a root and a stem of Jesse. Do you understand? So who is this root and stem and the rod and the branch? What spirit is there? Is the spirit of Christ. Do you understand? Read on.
Wherefore, says Christ,
right?
I am the root and the offspring of David, and the bright and morning star,
right?
bearing out that he is all and in all.
Right. That's what we read in Revelation chapter 22, verse 16. That's why he said, I am the root and the offspring of David and the bright and morning star. So this is the setup where the Spirit of Christ reigns from these 5 angels' messages, and the prophet is given all these 5 angels' messages to proclaim as a ruler of the 144,000. Do you understand? Now let's hear, since therefore,
from the stem of Jesse came the rod,
right?
And from the rod sprang the branch Christ.
Right?
David, the visible king, and Christ, the invisible king of kings.
So what do we have then in the judgment of the living? We have what we call the prophet, who is now called David, is what is called a visible king. And what do we have behind David? Who is walking behind, who we don't see behind David? We have Christ, the invisible king. Did you understand? Right?
David, the visible king, and Christ, the invisible king of kings, shall in that day, in our time, constitute the ensign.
So where is the ensign? Where we see the prophet, that's where the branch is. And that's what is called the ensign. Did you understand? Right?
David, the visible king, and Christ, the invisible king of kings, shall in that day, in our time, constitute the ensign, and to it shall the Gentiles see.
Go and read Isaiah chapter 60, verse 13. So now we are able to understand Isaiah 60. So you see the prophecies of Isaiah, Ezekiel, Zechariah, that's where all the gems of salvation are laid. But that's the job of Elijah now, to exhume them to the people. Right, read on verse 13.
Isaiah 60.
Yeah, 60, verse 13. 60, verse 13.
The glory of Lebanon shall come.
No, read from the paragraph where I was reading there.
Okay. I will make the place of my feet glorious.
Right. So this is the glory that God is saying, I will make my feet glorious. Did you hear that? And
I will set up one shepherd over them.
Right.
And he shall feed them, even my servant David.
Right.
He shall feed them, and he shall.
Now you are reading from
Ezekiel
chapter 34, verse 23 to 25. If you have the Bibles, open your Bibles. Ezekiel 34, verse 23 to 24. So now you understand then when you go to the next chapter, which is Ezekiel, where Christ says, and I will set up one shepherd. When the shepherd have gone unfaithful. So you do yourself a favor and start the whole chapter, so that when you go to verse 23, you understand what God is talking about. Now, what is it on verse 23?
And the Lord will be their God.
I will set up. Verse 23.
And I will set up one shepherd over them.
Right.
And he shall feed them.
Right.
Even my servant David.
Right. So you now understand where God was complaining initially in 34, that my shepherd, they woe unto the shepherd who don't feed my flock. Now he says, in the end, I'll gather those sheep which has been scattered all over, and I will set up one shepherd over them. You understand now? And clearly God says, and he shall feed them, even my servant David. So David starts in the judgment of the living, where people are being cast out, even for believing the present truth, they are being cast out. And God sets up a shepherd for those who are being cast out, because they are for the message, which this Elijah is spreading as an arm of the Lord. For people he doesn't even know, yet he is accumulating what is called 144,000. They come because of the message which David now is preaching as Elijah. So when he's talking about Elijah, he's talking about a prophet preaching this message. When he's talking about David, he's talking about the beginning of the kingdom message, where he will be ruling with King David, who is the Elijah. So in another context, is an Elijah professing the message. And in another context, is a David being now the scepter, which does not depart from Judah, which Christ will come and be raised as a branch unto David. Do you understand that? It's so clear and straightforward. Now let's hear.
And I, the Lord, will be their God,
Right.
and my servant David a prince among them.
Now he makes David a prince among them. Right?
And I will make, and I, the Lord, will be their God, and my
Right.
servant David a prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken it.
God is saying, I've spoken it. I haven't even come to you. You know, we are talking about the theocratic government. Now we are saying God will bring the theocratic government when he established the kingdom. But how does it start? It starts by having Elijah. Or in another context, the very Elijah being the David, who is preparing to start the theocratic government in the kingdom when he established the kingdom, when he comes. Do you understand? So now he's saying, I, the Lord, have spoken it. So who can say no when God has spoken it? It's him. And when he said it, it will be fulfilled. Now read on this here.
And I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David a prince among them.
Right?
I, the Lord, have spoken it. And I will make with them a covenant of peace, and will cause the evil beasts to cease out of the land, and they shall dwell safely in the wilderness, and sleep in the woods.
You see that now we are in the kingdom. He's now talking about the setup of the kingdom. If the beasts will be peaceful, they will be lying in the woods out there. He will, you know, it's the kingdom of peace. There will be peace in the valley. Did you understand? When now you listen to that song, you understand that it is the kingdom song. Go next. This being.
Thus, this being so, then it necessarily follows that so the first king who reigned over Israel.
Right.
And
I want you to start where it says, where did we say? Thus his church.
Okay.
Yeah, we jumped to that one because it's commenting about the verse 34.
Thus his church or kingdom is again reflected without spot or wrinkle,
right?
or any such thing.
That's what we get in Ephesians chapter 5 verse 27. Read it from the Bible. What do we get? How do we come to that church which has no spot or wrinkle? David or Elijah has been raised to give all those qualities that has rested upon David or upon the prophet of the hour, to give this message, present truth to the people so that people get the seal. Now, 5 verse 27, Ephesians.
That he might present it to himself a glorious church.
How does he present to himself now a glorious church?
Not having spot or wrinkle.
Which has no spot, no wrinkle.
Or any such thing.
He created a king who reigns, who is his arm, and gave all the talents that we read in Isaiah chapter 11. Quick fear of the Lord, counsel, quick understanding, knowledge, and wisdom. Yeah, all that he gave to his servant, so that the servant will bring a church which has no spot or wrinkle. Now, see what we are having in the house of God. Can you say this is what God is saying? There is no spot, no wrinkle. No. God has a plan for the people to have no spot, no wrinkle. He has a plan. He has his arm. The scepter of Judah shall not depart until Shiloh comes. Shiloh, who is Christ, coming as a branch to join David, who has been working in his stead at the ceiling of the 144,000. And he will stay now in the kingdom, ruling, and both the branch and David become the ensign raised for the Gentiles to see. Do you understand? Now, here, read on where you are. A theocracy.
A theocracy of peace, safety, and invincibility under the rule of one shepherd and a king, David.
So, when he says, I will appoint them one king, who is David? He has gone back that time where he was ruling with David. It was a theocratic system which God is now bringing back to the people who are being saved. That's why I say the topic is judgment living and the theocratic system. Do you see they go hand in hand now? Why pick on David? Why didn't he say Solomon? Because Solomon reigned in a time where the 12 tribes had been, they had been promised that they are going to be divided into two tribes of Judah, 10 tribes because of his mischief. So it was divided when his son Rehoboam was reigning. That's when the kingdom was rent in twain. But now God is saying the theocratic system had finished with David. Because in Solomon's time, because of what he had, he wouldn't be given this theocratic. He was promised to reign over a kingdom which is, when he was reigning, Solomon, when he was reigning, his son now took over. When he died, Rehoboam, and was in charge only of 2 tribes of Judah. Yet Jeroboam took the 10 tribes. That's why we see now Jeroboam taking the 10 tribes, putting them on Samaria. So Solomon was just left, something which was under Solomon was just 2 tribes. But when we are talking of the 12 tribes of Israel coming, the 144,000 coming from 12 tribes, who was reigning with 12 tribes? It's David. It's not Solomon. Because Solomon ended up with 2 tribes under the leadership of his son, Rehoboam. The son is one who inherited his curse, which he was told by God that your kingdom was rent in twain. But the person who reigned when the kingdom was still together, the 2 tribes and the 10 tribes, is David. That's why he continued to repeat about David, the reign which was in David. Now we've studied that. Why is this David, everyone? We need to know where God is coming from. When he mentions Elijah, when he mentions David. Now we are reigning in the time of David. Let's hear more where we are reading.
But the fact that many kings reigned over Israel may in the minds of some give rise to the question, why David a type?
Right. Why? Why is David the type of this kingdom? Right? Read on, let's hear.
Inevitably, because he is the only one who perfectly fits the antitype,
Why?
the leadership.
Why is David a type? He's the only one who fits the antitype. As I've been explaining, he's the only one who reigned when there was 12 tribes of Israel. But there was another reason why David at this time. We will understand that reason as we read. Right? Let's hear why David is the type. Read on.
Inevitably, because he is the only one who perfectly fits the antitype.
Right.
In the time of the loud cry of the third angel's message.
Right.
This being so, then it necessarily follows that Saul, the first king who reigned over Israel and who was largely responsible for the early experience of David's life, is a type of the church leadership in the period preceding the loud cry.
So why David a type? Because the history of David fits snugly with the history of the last time of the church. Why? Because compare Saul and David. You see that in the time of David was ruling from appointment by God. And how did Saul rule? Who brought Saul into leading the 12 tribes? Who did that? Who did that? Is it God? No. He was elected by a vote. So in the history of Laodicea, we come from a time where leaderships have been raised through votes. Is it correct? Is it the same way David was raised? No. David was not voted for. If they voted, David wasn't going to win. David was not even, in the eyes of the brothers, was not even fit to rule. Was not elected by a vote. But where do we find people being elected by votes? We find them leading Laodicea. It's a vote which works. But it's not a vote which works when David was ruling. David was raised by God himself. But now let's read. That's why God is talking about David in our time. Because them two leaders, we saw when in Zechariah chapter 6 that there is two leadership. There was bay horses, there was grizzled horses in the last chariot, which is Laodicea. So one chariot is elected by votes, which is the grizzled, and the other chariot is elected by God, which are the bay horses, which fits snugly by the history of David and Saul. So are we together there? Right, let's hear. Right, read from where you left. Why David? Why
the
David?
leadership which was raised up in 1844, and for the sole purpose of the gathering of the 144,000, the first fruits of the kingdom.
Right?
In each case, type perfectly matches antitype. On account of his outwardly kingly appearance, Saul was chosen by the people.
So
as
how
the
was
leader.
Saul chosen by the people? Was he so well read, or so well educated, or so well invested by the fear of the Lord? No, it was by the outward appearance. The people vote. What do they consider when they vote? They vote for what they see with their eyes. This is how Saul was elected. How then do the people vote? From your setup, how do they vote? I can see people, when it comes to October, it's a time to elect church officers. What do you consider? What do you consider? They all, where is the church? Where we need a nominating committee. The nominating committee itself, you look at it, you have doubts of how people are going to nominate already. This is how Saul was nominated, because they are going to use their eyes. They are going to say, is this so and so? No. So and so is engrossed in present truth. We don't want someone who goes to present truth. Let's take someone who does not go to present truth. This is how they elected Saul. So David fits snugly for the prophecies of the last time. That there is one who is elected by God to meet those who are ruling with Saul, who were electing using eyes. Do you understand? Now let's read on here. God is electing 144,000 from the church. He will never use someone who has been voted for to make sure the 144,000 are well sealed. He will use his own prophet elected in the manner David was elected.
Amen.
Now read on this here.
On account of his outwardly kingly appearance,
Right?
Saul was chosen by the people,
That's what the Spirit of prophet says.
as the reader will remember,
Right?
to be their king in spite of God's disapproval.
Now let's hear from the Bible itself. Go to 1 Samuel chapter 8. Want to prove that point. 1 Samuel chapter 8 verse 7.
And the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people,
Right?
in all that they say unto thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them.
So the people who were pushing Samuel saying, "We are now too old." And worse, he had sons who were very, very unfaithful. And this old prophet. And they came to Samuel to say, "No, let us be like other people, other world. They are choosing, they are voting, they have democracy." And God said to Samuel, "These people are not rejecting you, Samuel. They are rejecting me because that's my system." So that's when the democratic system started in the religion of voting. It started with those people who were voting for Saul. Now read on this here. Then finally,
When God rejected him and anointed David to be a king in his stead, he was determined to retain the throne by attempting to
God did not wait for Saul to get old. When the people had appointed him, and he showed how unfaithful he was, messing around everywhere, messing around, voting for this, killing even the prophets, killing, God had to raise David as mercy towards his people who were being abused by Saul. Whilst he was still able to rule, not when he was old, but whilst he was still able to rule with all the energy, God raised David to rescue his people from the leader of Israel, who was called Saul, who did not know he had been elected the way the other nations were electing. They brought this system in the religion, and God had to feel pity for his people and raised Elijah and raised David. Do you understand? Now, here we are finally, when God rejected Saul,
and
he anointed David to be king. So, when God, we are talking of a prophet. That's why you hear people telling you that there's no prophet. They know when there is a prophet, that will surely mean Ezekiel 34 has been fulfilled, where God is saying, "Woe unto the shepherds who are not managing my sheep. They are not feeding my flock with present truth." In Ezekiel 34. So they know for sure, if God has to bring a prophet, then the war goes to the shepherd. So that's why they just tell you exactly that there's no prophet, there's no prophet here, there's no prophet. And they know once God raises a prophet, then Saul has been rejected. Let's hear more. It's very nice, this thing. Even if it doesn't finish today, we have no time to rush with this and that without understanding. We can even take it up. Next, I told you that the judgment of the living takes the bulk of the months and bulk of the Sabbaths and the new moons and the feasts and what. We are talking about the judgment of the living. Here under the theocracy of God being introduced in the sealing of the 144,000 by the prophet of the hour. Now let's hear there. Finally, when God rejected him, he anointed David to be king. Right, read on.
He was determined to retain the throne by attempting to kill David.
Right, you see, Saul does not want. Now when I say Saul, you know exactly who is Saul in our time. Saul does not want to leave the chair, because the chair belongs to David. You see, he was clinging to the post. Saul, clinging to the post. Instead wanted to kill David so that he maintains. But what Saul did not know was God had already rejected him. whether it clung or killed David, God would even go and appoint another one. God was not still going to use somebody he has rejected at all. Saul would try this and that, go with men out hunting for David everywhere. That showed that his mind had no thinking medulla oblongata. It was not there. Because how can you be hunting? Instead of kneeling and say, God, is that so? If that's so, thy will be done. Like which was with Eli, the prophet Eli. When God said Ichabod, he did not fight for his post. No. He said, what God has done, that's it. He is the finalizer of every situation. But Saul, because he has no spirit of God, was hunting everywhere for David, hunting everywhere. Instead of going to God who changes kings. God is the one who changes kings. Now here, even the spirit of prophets will tell you from Testimonies to Ministers, volume 5, page 80, it will tell you that there will be a swap over. This is a Saul being replaced by David. Do you understand? Now let's read from here. Let's hear. Finally, he was determined now to retain the throne. Listen to that.
But ended up even before David ascended it by deliberately killing himself.
What happened? He was hunting to kill David. But what happened? Who died first?
Saul.
It was Saul. You get that one in 1 Samuel chapter 31 verse 4. He died first. Or at least he was trying to maintain the throne, to make sure he clings to it, and hunting for anyone who takes his rule. But he died first. Because when God has appointed the servant of God, God has appointed a prophet. No matter how much you try, God has done it. God has done it. He won't change. No matter how you can try, when God has said there will be a swap over, there will be a swap over. The kingdom will be given to the bear horses who go to and fro the whole world, making sure the will of God is done, ruling as an arm of God. No matter how much you try, you might end up killing yourself like Saul. Now here he's saying, listen to that. Time has already demonstrated.
Time has already demonstrated that Laodicea is fulfilling the type.
Laodicea, the time is demonstrating that Laodicea is fulfilling this type. This type of David and Saul is fulfilling how? Listen to that.
Preferring to incorporate and to elect officers by the people's vote, they have thereby manifested that they have cared not so much to please God by being peculiar people, as he would have them to be, as they have to please themselves by being as much as possible like the other denominations, just as in Saul's time the people wanted to be like the nations round about.
Right. This is what the people said in 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 5. Go to 1 Samuel in the Bible. 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 5. You see, this is what they wanted to be. Let's be the same as others. Let's be the same as others. Listen.
Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together and came to Samuel unto Ramah, and said unto him, Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations.
Like what it is with other nations. So like what it is with other denominations. We should be the same as the same. And we can see this attempt being done now this year. Do you understand? Any point, let's go to the vote. Let's go to vote. And the majority. You listen, if they ever voted in those 12 spies, we had gone to inspect and spy over Israel in the journey by Moses. It was by Joshua, by Moses. When they came back, how many were saying, no, we can't win, we can't go over and inherit Canaan? How many? 10. Only 2, Caleb and Joshua, were the ones who were faithful, said, we will. 10 wanted to recant the message which came to Moses from God to say, go and inherit Canaan. 10 will say, we can't. So if they voted, Were they going to succeed and go and inherit Canaan? Were they? But what is this voting in the religious? It is coming from Saul. Saul, the time Saul was elected, was voted for to lead the religious world. But it happened that God, before he got to his old age, he was replaced by David. And you know very well how David was selected by God. Even when in the house of Jesse, when he went there, Samuel, even when he ever said, let's vote for, these are all your sons, let's vote, who can we? If he ever made that mistake, they were going to choose Eliab, the firstborn. But God made sure that 7 of them, which had been prepared to rule in this theocratic system, 7 of them were disqualified. Only someone who was useless heading the cattle there. You can imagine someone heading the cattle. How dressed was he? Do you think when he was called, he was dressed in suit like Eliab? He was dressed in a way that even the brothers, they looked at him and said, what? They are used to kicking him about as a useless thing. And now he's the one being, the cup Samuel did not tilt the cup. The cup tilted on its own like that to David. To someone who the eyes cannot acknowledge. The eyes cannot say, this one, let's vote for this one. The eyes will never. It's just like Isaiah 55 says, so it's hiding. It's hiding, and the tempests are all, and this gold is there hiding somewhere, because nobody can acknowledge that person as somebody sent of God. Nobody. Let alone if it is a woman. Nobody will ever look at the woman. Nobody. But God manifests his power to the Elijah or the David of the time, like it was. When David came, God saw that this young boy, that's where I am, this young boy, miserable as he looks, wretched as he looks, that's where God was. Surprised the people who were believing in what the eyes can be satisfied with. The suit, the ties, the pomp, the everything. He surprised them. God surprised them and appointed something that they never ever guessed. Do you understand? Now here we are talking about the present truth, brethren. And we are enjoying this subject. And we'll go with it. For the theocracy of God. How does that manifest? Is it from the vote? Or is it from God himself tilting the cup of anointment? Do you understand? Now here, although chosen by the people, read on.
Time has already demonstrated.
Right. You see where Isaiah 8 verse 5.
And although chosen by the people, yet the officers were nevertheless accepted by God to be the rulers over his people now, as Saul was anciently.
Yeah, even when they chose Saul, God accepted Saul. He did not say, oh, because you have been voted for. No. He accepted him. So that the people will see where he goes wrong. And I'm sure when he came to appoint David, and David came as a king, the people heaved a sigh, a big sigh of relief to recognize their mistake. Now they're getting a king who comes directly from the hand of the Lord, from the Spirit of God. But God did not refuse Saul to go on the ladder. He accepted him so that he messes up for himself. So then, I'm appointed by God. Yes, it's fine. You're appointed by God. But what are the works? You shall see them by their fruits. The fruits will show who is using you then. Because appointment, yes, is another thing. But how do you work? The work will prove whether it is from God or not. Right. Now listen, finish that one. We are going to read also, find even for testimonies, volume 5, page 211. It comes there on that paragraph. Let's hear that. Although
chosen by the people, yet the officers were nevertheless accepted by God to be the rulers over his people now, as so was anciently.
Right. So they were accepted by God to be there in the Laodicea. They are accepted by God. But let's see how we move. Let's see.
Just as he betrayed his trust.
Right.
However, by disobeying the word of God, as spoken to him by the prophet Samuel, so the present church organization, the ancient men before the house, have, says the prophet, to the church today betrayed their trust.
It's Testimonies 211, volume 5, Testimonies for the church. It says, they betrayed also their trust. How? That's why this lot of Ezekiel 9 is coming. Because they destroyed, they betrayed their trust. Why? Because the sealing was there. Who should actually be active with the seals of early writing, page 15, saying God, New Jerusalem, and the glorious star? Who should be active? David is active because Saul knows nothing about the three seals, nothing. That's betraying the trust. Because God has put that early writings, page 15, to say this is the message is going to seal the church. Let's read it, early writing. We always read it and read it again. Right? Early writings, page 15. What is the seal? You go about and say the seal is just the Sabbath, that's it. But the seal is clear from early writings what it is. Right?
The 144,000 were all sealed and perfectly united. On their foreheads was written, God, New Jerusalem, and a glorious star containing Jesus' name.
That's how it is. It's clear. God, New Jerusalem, and a glorious star containing Jesus' new name. But you go to Saul. Saul will tell you that the seal is the Sabbath. That's it. Right? You go to David. David will tell you the seal is God, New Jerusalem, and a glorious star containing Jesus' new name. Even in Revelation chapter 3, it's there. At verse 12, it's the same three seals. But Saul will tell you that no, it's not. You go to David. David is preparing people, the 144,000, to be sealed by those three seals, as seen by Sister White. But you ask Saul, Saul has nothing, no idea about early writing, page 15. Not even a single idea. He's ready to hop in the cloud. That's it. But God is saying he chose David while Saul was still able to lead. Why? Because he had rejected Saul and put David. And David was appointed when Saul was still alive and kicking, able. That's why he went everywhere looking for David to kill David. But instead, he killed himself. Now, here, let's hear where you were reading. God accepted it. But then they betrayed their trust in volume 5, right?
You have no right to manage.
Here we are reading from General Conference Bulletin, 34th section, volume 4, extra 9, 1 April 3, 1901, page 25, and also COLs 1 and 2. We are going to read that. If you want, you go and Google those verses. Right, let's hear. You have no right.
You have no right to manage unless you manage in God's order.
A manager in the spiritual realm has no right to manage unless managing, in God's order. What is God's order? Saul had no right to manage because he was not managing in God's order. Right? He had no right. This is coming from the spiritual prophets. Are you under the control of God?
Are you under the control of God? Do you see your responsibility to him? That these men should stand in a sacred place to be as the voice of God to their people, as we once believed the conference to be. This is past. What we want now is reorganization. This is what Sister White said in the 34th session, General Conference Bulletin, Volume 4, Extra 9, 1, April 3, 1901, page 25. He says, the voice is no longer the voice of God. Clearly he says that. Clearly. This is how God said to Saul. The voice is no longer the voice of God. He rejected Saul. That's why he looked for David.
Now let's hear more. Let's hear more there. This revelatory statement.
This revelatory statement conclusively proves that after the historical Minneapolis meeting in 1888, when the leaders rejected both the message and the counsel which was given them.
You can research that one in Testimonies to Ministers 468.
The Lord did not any longer regard the Laodicean as his servants, just as he did not any longer regard Saul as king over Israel after he turned.
1888 is clear in Selected Messages, volume 1, page 233 and 234, was the message from 80 Johns and Webber was rejected outrightly. This is where God said it's no longer the voice of God. God said no longer. He rejected Saul completely there. Why? Because the message came and Saul rejected. This is what he did when William Miller was preaching to those 4 churches outside. We had started Reformation. When they ignored William Miller and rejected William Miller, and when Miller was preaching to them about the coming of Christ, then they rejected him. He also rejected them straight away in 1844. And here, how else God can act in a people who reject 1888 messages? That's when they became Saul. Saul was rejected because he did not have the voice from God. Now let's hear more. His servants.
The Lord did not any longer regard the Laodicea as his servants, just as he did not any longer regard Saul as king over Israel after he turned from the Lord's commands to him.
Right. Let's jump and go to God calls for a spiritual. We are quoting from Review and Herald, February 25, 1902. Right. Let's read.
God calls for a spiritual revival and a spiritual reformation. Unless this takes place, those who are lukewarm will continue to grow more abhorrent.
So after the rejection of 1888, God now wanted a spiritual revival and reformation. Those 2 words, revival is a new renewal of the spirit. Reformation is a reorganization. So he wanted a reorganization from 1888 because they rejected the 1888 message. So revival is the renewal of the spirit. Reformation is reorganization. He called for it in 18. So God knows he will reorganize using his prophet of the hour, David or Elijah. Now let's hear what he does when he reorganized. The next page. When we read from February 25, 1902, Review and Herald.
A revival and reformation must take place under the ministration of the Holy Spirit.
Right. So now what does he want? He wants a David who the cup tilts without a human being. The oil ran without the human being causing it to run on this one with that one. It's God who will tilt the cup. From 1888, God was tilting the cup himself. He wants the reformation and a reorganization. A revival and reformation must take place under the ministration of the Holy Spirit. Never mind the bulk of people. We are safe and sound. Well, we have. That's the Laodicean malady. He says, I have all the truth I need to the delegates. Rich and increase and whatever. Don't worry about all that. But those who are looking for the seal, God will revive them and reorganize them and reform them to be part of the 12 tribes of Israel in the church triumphant. And this is the job of Elijah. Now let's hear. A revival signifies, what does it signify?
Revival and reformation are 2 different things.
2 different things.
Revival signifies a renewal of spiritual life.
Right.
A quickening of the powers of the mind
That's
and
revival.
heart. A resurrection from spiritual death.
Wake up from spiritual death.
Reformation signifies a reorganization.
Right.
A change in ideas and theories.
Ideas should be changed.
and
what?
theories.
Theories to be changed.
Habits and practices.
Habits and practices to be changed.
Reformation would not bring forth the good fruit of righteousness unless it is connected with the revival of the Spirit.
Right. So unless it is connected with the revival of the Spirit, living Spirit of prophecy, unless that is there, from the death of Sister White 1915, this revival and reformation has been called for. Did we see anyone coming as a prophet to the house of God? Did we? No. Not a one. They will tell you there's nothing. Sister White is the last one. That's what Saul will tell you. Saul will tell you, I'm stuck. There I am there. But we have the fourth angel's message, a fifth angel's message, and Elijah of the time that will bring the revival and reformation to the 144,000 who are now being incorporated into the church triumphant. Why? Because they rejected the 1888 message. It's in black and white. That's why Saul was rejected. And God, busy now looking for David of the hour to go with the revival and reformation to make sure the people are prepared for the kingdom as 144,000 standing on Mount Zion when the branch or the lamb comes to join them. Now, this is what God is doing. Now, read one less here.
Reformation will not bring forth the good fruit of righteousness unless it is connected with the revival of the Spirit.
Right.
Revival and reformation are to do their appointed work, and in doing this work, they must blend.
Right. So, revival cannot be revived. You can't be revived without reformation. I can see some people say, okay, I just want the word and the word alone. And as long as you are not reorganized, the word, these two should blend. You are revived by the Spirit and reorganized. Have a change of ideas, change of theories. What theories did you have? That we are going to hop in the cloud without the time of trouble such as never was. Change that one. That the kingdom is going to be established as it is in Daniel chapter 12, where the Michael shall stand, and then a time of trouble follows. Change the habit that you're just going to bypass the kingdom. Change that one. Change all that refers to a nail to the cross. Change it. Because they were changed, they were tempered in the Dark Ages, well after the cross. Change all those ideas. Change all the ideas that the daily had been messed around by the men of sin, and the daily is no longer there. People are just living the whole day without the daily. Change the ideas. That's revival and reformation will continue. And unless this occurs, you will continue to grow like Laodicea. Rich and increased, wretched and poor, naked. And the worst thing that you know it's not. Blind. This is Laodicea in Revelation chapter 3. It shows this is what verse 14, go and read for yourself. That's the spiritual setup of Saul. Do you understand? Now let's hear this revelatory statement.
This revelatory statement conclusively proves that after the historical Minneapolis meeting in 1888, when the leaders rejected both the message and the counsel which was given them, the Lord did not any longer regard his general conference as his servants, just as he did not any longer regard Saul as king over Israel after he turned from God's commands to him. And now, having long since granted the popular demand to organize themselves in fulfillment of the type, God warns that his forbearance is come to an end today just as it did then. Solemnly declares the spirit of prophecy.
That was 8 tract 49.2. So, we know the history and we know what continued with the future prophet and the next prophet, and until today all this is chronicled in black and white. If you are a reader, that's why God says, I'll raise somebody who has read all these 5 messages, who knows what continued from being uttered by God, even when the Millerites rejected Sister White not to continue with Sister White, and those who were with Sister White rejected not to continue with VT Hotef, and those with the VT Hotef rejected not to continue with Van Roden, with the branch. When Elijah is raised, we'll put everything which was rejected back to the people. This is revival and reformation in the judgment of the living. We are going to continue with this revival and reformation, and it is the judgment of the living. God has a scepter which does not go away from Judah. It will continue until Shiloh comes. May God bless this message as we continue to enjoy judgment of the living coming from Ahola, Aholiba, and we are learning all that, how God is taking people from these names, two sisters, Ahola and Aholiba, and also incorporating them under the rulership of the fifth angel, and Elijah being raised as Elijah and as David, so that the future kingdom, when Christ comes as a branch, to incorporate the kingdom when the ensign has been produced between Christ, the branch, and David, the future king. We now understand how the kingdom should be established. For sure, it will. To those who believe like children, they will inherit the kingdom. May God bless you all.